My dad cut me and my sister out of his life and gave his new stepdaughters the love and life we always dreamed of. Now, years later, I'm getting married, and he had the nerve to ask if he could walk me down the aisle. I'm Olivia, 27F, have been struggling with this situation for months now and honestly don't know if I'm making the right call anymore. So, growing up, I always felt like something was off with my dad, Richard, 58M. He wasn't just busy with work, he was emotionally distant. He was barely there for me and my sister Amanda, 29F, on any meaningful level. My mom, Diana, 56F, tried so hard to make everything seem normal, but it was painfully obvious something was broken between them. They argued constantly, usually about small stuff like money, work schedules, or random things we did wrong. Richard had this special talent for making everything feel like it was our fault. I know it sounds weird, but despite everything, I still have some good memories of him. Like, I inherited my love for cheesy action movies from him. Sometimes we'd sit together and laugh about how ridiculous the fight scenes were or how the hero could somehow survive a 20-story fall without a scratch. But looking back now, those moments were frustratingly rare islands in a sea of indifference. Most days, he'd come home from work tired and irritable and would take it out on us, not physically, but with cutting words and a tone that made us feel like burdens rather than his children. The thing is, he wasn't a monster 24/7. There were times when he could be pleasant or at least not completely cold. But as I got older, I started to realize that nice dad only appeared when he had absolutely no reason to be upset. The moment even the tiniest thing went wrong, he'd transform into this completely different person. One time when I was around 12, I accidentally left a kitchen light on overnight. You'd think I had committed a federal crime with how he reacted. He spent a solid 15 minutes lecturing me about responsibility and wasting electricity, calling me careless and saying I didn't respect our home. I was just a kid. I didn't understand why leaving a single light on was such a catastrophic offense worth that level of anger. Amanda always got it worse though. She wasn't afraid to stand up to him, which seemed to make him target her more. She had, still has, this strong personality and didn't back down from anyone, but that only made Richard more frustrated. I remember this one time when she was 16 and I was 14, she simply asked him why he never attended our school events. Instead of giving a reasonable answer, he erupted like a volcano, shouting about how he was out working his ass off to support this family and how dare we question his commitment. He stormed out and didn't speak to either of us for 3 days after that. His reactions made me nervous to even talk to him sometimes. I'd rehearse simple questions in my head before approaching him, trying to predict his mood and whether it was safe to ask for something as basic as permission to go to a friend's house. Living like that was exhausting. Then, when I was about 17, everything fell apart completely. My mom couldn't take it anymore. They'd been fighting constantly for months, and it finally reached a breaking point. She asked for a divorce. I wasn't surprised, but it still hit me hard. I naively thought that maybe after the divorce, things would get better. Maybe without the constant tension between him and Mom, Richard would try harder to be an actual father to us. I was old enough by then to understand that adults have their own problems, and I figured maybe without the stress of his failing marriage, he'd be more present for Amanda and me. Boy, was I wrong. So wrong. About a year after the divorce was finalized, Richard remarried. And here's the kicker, he didn't even tell us. No heads up, no hey, I'm seeing someone, nothing. I literally found out from my cousin that he had married this woman, Vanessa, completely out of the blue. I was shocked, but what hurt even more was discovering that her daughters, Emily, 16 at the time, and Jessica, 14 at the time, were invited to the wedding ceremony. So basically, this man could invite 2 girls he'd known for maybe a year, but not his actual daughters who he'd known their entire lives. Amanda and I were absolutely livid. I mean, how do you get married and not invite your biological children? It felt like such a deliberate slap in the face. That's when I decided to go no contact. I was done trying. Amanda agreed, and we both cut him off completely. I didn't see the point in putting any more effort into a relationship with someone who clearly didn't value us. I remember thinking, if he wants to play dad as someone else's kids, fine. But I'm not sticking around to watch the show. For a long time, almost 3 years, I didn't speak to him at all. And honestly, it was freeing in a way. I didn't have to deal with the constant disappointment or walking on eggshells around his unpredictable moods. I could focus on building my own life without feeling like I was chasing after someone who didn't care. During this time, I met Kyle, my boyfriend, now fiancé. We clicked immediately. He was everything Richard wasn't: attentive, stable, supportive. Things were going better than they had in years. But deep down, there was always this nagging feeling. Like, despite everything, I still wanted my dad to be part of my life. I wanted him to meet Kyle, to see that I was happy, to be proud of the woman I'd become. When Kyle proposed last year, something shifted in me. I thought maybe it was time to let go of the grudge. You know, be the bigger person. I figured inviting Richard to the wedding might be a good way to start fresh. I didn't want to carry all that anger and resentment with me into this new chapter of my life. So before sending out invites, I unblocked him on Facebook, just to see what he'd been up to. I don't even know why I did it, curiosity, I guess. Maybe I wanted to see if he changed, if there was any hope of rebuilding our relationship. What I found hit me like a punch to the gut. His profile picture was him, Vanessa, Emily, and Jessica, all smiling like the perfect little family. The caption said something cheesy about how they meant the world to him. In all the years I could remember, he had never, not once, posted anything remotely similar about me or Amanda. I sat there staring at my screen, feeling like I'd been replaced, like I was never good enough for him to care about the way he clearly cared about them. And it didn't stop there. As I kept scrolling, I saw more and more pictures, vacations, birthdays, holidays. He had taken them to Hawaii, something he had never done for us growing up. The only vacations Richard ever took when we were kids were solo hunting trips where he'd leave us behind with Mom. And now he was taking Vanessa's daughters on fancy trips to tropical islands? I couldn't believe it. I kept scrolling, masochistically absorbing every photo, every caption that proved how little we had meant to him. The thing that really broke me, though, was when I discovered he had bought Emily and Jessica each a dog. He never let us have pets growing up. In fact, when I was 9, he got rid of my dog, a sweet little terrier mix I'd named Buddy, when I was at school one day because, according to him, it barked too much. I came home and Buddy was just gone. He didn't even give me a chance to say goodbye. I cried for weeks. But here was Richard buying these girls purebred golden retrievers and treating them like they were his own daughters. It was like he had a whole new life with no room for Amanda or me in it. Seeing all that opened up every old wound. I realized that no matter what I did, I was never going to have the dad I needed. He was always going to choose someone else over me. It hurt like hell, but at the same time, it made me see things with painful clarity. Richard was never going to change. He would always put himself first, even if it meant abandoning his own children. I thought seeing those Facebook pictures was rock bottom, but nope. Things got so much worse after that. After all the scrolling and feeling like absolute garbage, I told myself to just let it go. I was done being angry. Kyle and I had a wedding to plan, and I wasn't going to let Richard and his perfect new family ruin that for me. But then something happened that I absolutely didn't expect. Out of nowhere, I got a text from Amanda with a screenshot attached. It was a photo of Richard with Emily and Jessica wearing matching dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The caption said something like "Proud dad moment with my beautiful girls." My first thought was, what the actual heck? Because in all my 27 years of existence, Richard had never once called me or Amanda his beautiful girls. Not once. Not on birthdays, graduations, nothing. I was still processing this when Amanda dropped another bomb. She told me she'd been cautiously talking to Richard again, just testing the waters to see if things could ever normalize between them. During one of their conversations, Richard mentioned that he was helping pay for Emily and Jessica's college tuition. Let that sink in for a minute. The same man who told Amanda and me that we needed to take out student loans because that's how the real world works and you need to learn financial responsibility was now offering to pay college tuition for 2 girls who weren't even biologically his. I still have $43,000 in student loan debt because of his refusal to help, and Amanda had to drop out after 2 years because she couldn't afford to continue. I was absolutely furious. I called Kyle immediately and just unloaded everything on him, the tuition issue, the matching dresses, everything. Kyle listened patiently as I ranted for nearly an hour, but what he said next really hit home. "You have every right to be upset, Olivia. But at the end of the day, is he really worth all this energy?" Kyle was right. Why was I letting this man who clearly didn't care about me or Amanda take up so much space in my head? It wasn't like Richard was suddenly going to transform into Father of the Year. But even though I knew that logically, I couldn't stop obsessing over it. Years of being ignored and dismissed were bubbling to the surface, and I didn't know how to process it all. Then my mom called with yet another revelation. She normally doesn't talk much about Richard since the divorce, figuring we're better off without him. She's not wrong. But she called me one evening, and I could tell something was up from her tone. "You're not going to believe what I heard," she said, sounding both angry and sad at the same time. Apparently, Richard had been telling everyone, family, friends, former colleagues, that he was so proud of his new daughters. And get this, he couldn't wait to walk them down the aisle when they got married someday. My blood was practically boiling. This man hadn't reached out once about my engagement or upcoming wedding. Not a text, not a call, nothing. But he was already planning to walk his stepdaughters down the aisle? He had even told one of our cousins that Vanessa and her girls were the best thing that ever happened to him. I was beyond hurt. It was like he was deliberately trying to erase Amanda and me from his life, replacing us with this shiny new family that made him look like Dad of the Year. The whole walking them down the aisle comment stung especially hard since I was the one actually getting married soon, and he hadn't even asked if I wanted him there. It became crystal clear that Richard didn't care about us anymore, if he ever truly did. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him to magically become the father I deserved. I decided that he didn't deserve to be at my wedding. I called Amanda to fill her in, and she completely understood my decision. While she was still trying to maintain some kind of civil relationship with Richard, she wasn't about to defend his behavior either. Just when I thought I was starting to come to terms with everything, Amanda mentioned something that knocked the wind out of me again. Richard had given Emily our grandmother's necklace, a beautiful vintage piece that had been in our family for generations. Growing up, Amanda and I would always admire it when we visited our grandma, who would tell us stories about how it was traditionally passed down to the eldest daughter. We always assumed it would go to one of us someday, technically Amanda, since she's older, but no, Richard gave it to Emily without even mentioning it to us. Just handed over a meaningful family heirloom to someone who wasn't even related to us by blood. I was speechless. Every precious piece of my childhood was being systematically erased as Richard handed over our family history to his new ready-made family. That was the final straw for me. I didn't need any more reasons to cut him off, but this sealed the deal. I blocked him on Facebook again, deleted his number from my phone, and decided to focus on the people who actually cared about me, my mom, Amanda, and Kyle. I didn't need Richard anymore. He could have his new family, his vacations, his stepdaughters, and his college funds. I was done letting him hurt me repeatedly. Life went on. I was busy with wedding planning, work stuff, and just trying to move forward. Then Amanda called me sounding weird. She dropped another bomb. Did you know Dad is throwing a huge birthday party for Emily and Jessica? Of course I didn't know, why would I? I wasn't part of his life anymore. But hearing that still felt like a knife to the gut. Amanda filled me in on all the details she'd heard through family members. Richard had rented an expensive venue, hired a professional DJ, and was throwing what sounded like the birthday bash of the century for his stepdaughters. The kicker? It was happening just a week before my own birthday, a birthday he hadn't acknowledged in years. Not a card, not a text, not even a generic Facebook message. But here he was going all out for Emily and Jessica like they were royalty. Look, I'm not someone who expects elaborate celebrations or expensive gifts. Never have been. But the fact that he couldn't even acknowledge my existence while planning this extravagant party for his stepdaughters? That hurt in ways I can't even describe. I tried to brush it off, but it was impossible. This wasn't just him forgetting or being busy, this was him actively, deliberately choosing someone else over his biological children. Again. That night, I vented to Kyle about everything. He listened as always, but I could tell he was frustrated on my behalf. After I finished explaining about the birthday party, he asked, "So what are you going to do about it?" The question caught me off guard because honestly, I hadn't thought about doing anything. I'd already blocked Richard everywhere, so what more could I do? But Kyle's question lingered in my mind. A few days later, I found myself discussing the whole situation with my mom. She wasn't surprised about the birthday party, she knew exactly what kind of person Richard was after being married to him for 20 years. But then she said something that changed my perspective. "Olivia, you don't have to keep letting him hurt you. You're allowed to stand up for yourself." I hadn't really thought about it that way before. In my mind, cutting him off was standing up for myself, but maybe there was more I needed to do. Maybe I needed to tell him exactly how his actions had affected me, even if he didn't care. So I decided to write him a letter. Not an angry, emotional rant, but something clear and honest that laid out how his behavior had impacted Amanda and me. It took several days and about 7 drafts to get it right. I kept starting over, unsure how to convey everything I was feeling without sounding like I was just bitter or looking for attention. In the final version, I told him how disappointed I was in him as a father. How it felt like he'd completely abandoned Amanda and me for his new family. I reminded him of specific instances when he hadn't been there for us growing up, and how that had only gotten worse after the divorce. I wrote about how hurt I was when I discovered he hadn't invited us to his wedding. How seeing those Facebook posts made me feel like I didn't even exist to him anymore. I detailed the college tuition situation and the family necklace he'd given away, driving home the point that he had systematically replaced us in every possible way. The hardest part was the conclusion, because deep down I knew this letter wouldn't change anything. I wasn't expecting a heartfelt apology or for him to suddenly realize the extent of the damage he'd caused. But I needed him to know that I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine anymore. I needed him to know that I was done. After finishing the letter, I showed it to Amanda. She supported my decision to send it, though I could tell she was nervous about the potential fallout. She'd been trying to maintain some kind of relationship with Richard, however strained, and didn't want to jeopardize that completely. But she understood why I had to do this, so I mailed the letter, not really knowing what would happen next. Weeks passed with no response. I wasn't surprised, but I still found myself checking my phone constantly, wondering if he'd reach out. Nothing. It was like the letter had disappeared into a black hole. Then, out of nowhere, I received a message, not from Richard, but from Vanessa. And it wasn't pleasant. She basically tore into me, saying I had no right to speak to Richard the way I did, that he was doing his best, and that I was being ungrateful and selfish for not appreciating all he'd supposedly done for Amanda and me. She went on this long, defensive rant about how raising stepdaughters was just as important as raising biological children, which I had never disputed, and that I needed to grow up and accept that my dad had moved on with his life. I was absolutely floored. First, I hadn't even mentioned her or her daughters in my letter. This was between me and my father. Second, how dare she lecture me about being ungrateful when she had no idea what Amanda and I had endured over the years. She hadn't lived through the constant neglect and disappointment. She didn't know what it was like to be consistently pushed aside and made to feel insignificant. I didn't respond to her message. There was no point. But that moment made something crystal clear to me. Richard wasn't just choosing his stepdaughters over us, he was letting Vanessa control the narrative completely. She had become the central figure in his life, and there was simply no room for Amanda or me anymore. Maybe there never would be. That realization was painful but necessary. It wasn't just about the vacations, or the college money, or the birthday party. It was about the fact that Richard had constructed an entirely new life that excluded us by design. He had made his choice, and as much as it hurt, I knew I had to accept it and move on. Time passed, and wedding preparations kept me busy. I was in a better place mentally. I had accepted that Richard wouldn't be part of my big day or any day after. I was focusing on the positive things, my relationship with Kyle, my friendship with Amanda, my supportive mom, my career that was finally starting to take off. Then, about 3 months before the wedding date, Amanda called me. I could tell from her voice that something was off. She danced around the subject at first, asking about wedding preparations and my dress, but finally she just dropped it. Dad called me. He asked if you'd reconsider inviting him to the wedding. He wants to walk you down the aisle. My heart literally sank to my stomach. After everything, after the years of neglect, after replacing us with his stepdaughters, after giving away family heirlooms, after throwing elaborate birthday parties like he was father of the century for Emily and Jessica, now he wanted to not only attend my wedding but have the honor of walking me down the aisle. I sat in stunned silence for several seconds, trying to process this bizarre turn of events. Amanda kept talking, telling me that Richard sounded sincere, that he really wanted to be there, that it would mean a lot to him to see me get married and be the one to give me away. He'd even used that classic line about how family is family, as if that somehow erased all the pain he'd caused over the years. The audacity of asking to walk me down the aisle after telling everyone how excited he was to someday do that for his stepdaughters was almost too much to handle. A tiny part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he had finally realized how much he'd hurt us and that this was his awkward attempt at making amends. I even had a fleeting image of what it might be like to have him walk me down the aisle, something I'd daydreamed about as a little girl before I understood what kind of father he really was. But the much larger, much wiser part of me felt this was far too little, far too late. Where was all this regret when I needed a father growing up? Where was it when he was giving away my grandmother's necklace or planning lavish parties for girls who weren't even his biological children? Where was it during all those years he made me feel like a burden rather than a daughter? And how dare he think he deserved the honor of walking me down the aisle when he hadn't earned the right to even be a guest at my wedding? I told Amanda I needed time to think about it. I didn't want to make a snap decision while emotional, especially since my wedding was supposed to be a happy day. I didn't want Richard's sudden reappearance to cast a shadow over what should be a celebration. But once the thought was in my head, it consumed me. That night, I talked it over with Kyle, who was supportive as always but asked the question that cut right to the heart of things: do you really want him there, or are you feeling guilty for not inviting him? That question hit me hard. I did feel guilty, but not for the reasons most people might think. I felt guilty because despite everything, a small part of me still wanted him at my wedding. There was this stubborn, childish corner of my heart that still craved his approval, his presence, his recognition. It felt like I was betraying myself by even considering letting him attend after everything he'd done. The next few days were a confusing blur of back and forth in my head. One minute I was convinced I should give him another chance, let him come to the wedding, see if he could be part of my life again. The next minute I was furious all over again, replaying every hurt, every slight, every time he'd chosen Vanessa and her daughters over Amanda and me. How could I possibly let someone who had caused me so much pain walk me down the aisle on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life? The more I thought about it, the more outrageous his request seemed. To have the nerve to ask for such an important role after being absent for so many years. It was almost laughable if it wasn't so painful. I ended up calling my mom for advice. She's always been the level-headed one, and I knew she'd have some valuable insight. When I told her about Richard wanting to not only come to the wedding but walk me down the aisle, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said something that broke through all my confusion: "Olivia, it's your wedding. You don't owe him anything, especially not the honor of walking you down the aisle when he hasn't been there for you. That's when everything clicked into place. I really didn't know Richard anything. I'd spent my entire life trying to make him care, trying to be the daughter he wanted, but it was never enough. And now, after all this time, I was still thinking about his feelings when the focus should have been on me and Kyle and our future together. I didn't need to invite him just because he was biologically my father. I didn't need to let him into my life if he hadn't earned that right. This was my day, and I wasn't going to let him ruin it by making it about him and his guilt. So I made my decision. I wasn't going to invite him. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking he could waltz back into my life at the last minute and pretend he hadn't spent years systematically erasing me from his. When I called Amanda to tell her my decision, she seemed a little surprised but ultimately understood. I could tell she still harbored some hope for reconciliation with Richard, but she respected my choice, and that's all that mattered. I didn't need validation from anyone else. This wasn't about getting approval, it was about taking control of my own life without Richard's shadow hanging over me. A couple of days later, I sent out the final wedding invitations. Richard's name wasn't on the list. I expected to feel guilty, but honestly, I felt lighter, like a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after my father's approval. I wasn't trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. I was living my life on my terms, and that felt surprisingly good. The day of my wedding arrived faster than I expected. Despite months of planning and obsessing over every detail, it felt like it snuck up on me. I woke up that morning in a hotel suite surrounded by my bridesmaids and Amanda, who had been my rock through everything. I was more nervous than I anticipated, but not about the typical bride things. It wasn't about the dress or the ceremony or whether the flowers would look right. It was about Richard's absence. As I was getting my hair and makeup done, I kept having these moments of doubt, wondering if I'd made the right choice. Deep down, I knew I had, but there was still that nagging voice in the back of my mind making me question everything. For so many years, I'd imagined what my wedding day would be like, and in some corner of my brain, I'd always pictured Richard walking me down the aisle. Letting go of that fantasy was harder than I expected. But Amanda was there, as always, making sure I didn't spiral. She knew exactly when I was overthinking, and whenever I started to get lost in my head, she'd pull me back with something like, "Olivia, this is your day. You've got nothing to worry about." She was right, of course. But the absence of Richard still hung over the morning preparations like a faint shadow. As I sat in front of the mirror while the stylist worked on my hair, I caught myself thinking about all the times growing up when I desperately wanted him to be proud of me. I'd imagine him watching me graduate, congratulating me on my first job, being there for all the important milestones. None of that ever happened. And now, on arguably the biggest day of my life, he wouldn't be there either. But the crucial difference was that this time, it was my choice. That realization was strangely empowering. Kyle, bless him, was the picture of calm that morning. He texted me a few hours before the ceremony with a simple "I love you." That made me smile instantly. He wasn't the type to get caught up in drama, and he'd always been the steady, reliable presence in my life, the one who showed up, who cared, who loved me unconditionally. If anyone deserved to be by my side on my wedding day, it was him. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The weather cooperated with clear skies and perfect temperatures, the venue looked amazing with all the decorations we'd agonized over, and when it came time to walk down the aisle, I didn't feel sad or angry anymore. My mom walked me down the aisle, and honestly, it felt absolutely right. She'd been my foundation through everything, and having her there supporting me as I started this new chapter with Kyle seemed perfectly fitting. The role Richard had asked for, that he thought he somehow deserved despite years of absence, was filled by the one person who had never left my side. And Kyle. I can't even describe the feeling when I saw him waiting for me at the altar. All the nerves, all the doubts, all the complicated emotions about Richard and his audacious request, they all evaporated the moment our eyes met. I knew in that moment that this was all that truly mattered. Richard wasn't there, but that was okay. The people who genuinely cared, who had always cared, were present, and that's what counted. The entire day passed in a happy blur. I remember snapshots, Amanda adjusting my veil, my mom wiping away tears during the vows, Kyle squeezing my hand reassuringly during particularly emotional moments. But most of it felt like a wonderful whirlwind. I wasn't focused on Richard or what might have been or any past drama. For once, I was fully present in the moment, and it was magical. Later that night during the reception, Amanda pulled me aside. She was smiling, but there was something in her expression that told me she had something important to share. "Dad called me," she said quietly. Just hearing those words made my stomach tighten, but I was curious. I hadn't spoken to him in months, and now on my wedding day, he decided to reach out? Amanda explained that Richard had called her that morning asking how I was doing and if I was nervous. He didn't try to invite himself or force his way into the day, but he did ask if I was happy. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Part of me was still angry, of course. How could I not be after everything? But another part of me appreciated that he didn't try to make the day about himself or his feelings. According to Amanda, he sounded different, like he genuinely regretted things but didn't know how to fix them. She told him I was doing great and that the wedding was beautiful. His response was simply, "That's good. Tell her I'm proud of her." Now, I know that's not the grand apology or emotional reconciliation that some might hope for. It wasn't a magical fix for years of hurt and neglect. But hearing that he was proud of me, even if it was secondhand through Amanda, affected me in a way I hadn't expected. It didn't erase the past or change the fact that he wasn't part of my life anymore, but it was something. I didn't call him. I didn't feel any need to. This day was about me and Kyle, not about Richard or his belated feelings of remorse. But strangely, knowing he was proud of me gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was still seeking. It didn't fix anything, but it felt like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on my entire life had finally fallen into place. By the end of the night, as Kyle and I shared our first dance as husband and wife, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Richard had made his choices, and I had made mine. I didn't need his approval or involvement to be happy. I had everything I needed right in front of me: my husband, my family, my friends, people who truly loved me. And that was more than enough. After the wedding, life settled into a new rhythm. It felt like a weight had been permanently lifted from my shoulders. I was married to Kyle, building our life together, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about Richard every day. I wasn't rehashing the past or questioning whether I'd made the right decision to cut him out of my life. I was just living, and it felt incredible. A few weeks after the honeymoon, Amanda and I were having lunch, catching up on work and life. We hadn't discussed the wedding or Richard much since that day, but as we were chatting about random things, she casually mentioned that she hadn't heard from him in a while either. I could tell she was still conflicted about the whole situation, not ready to cut him off completely like I had, but not exactly putting in much effort to maintain a relationship with him either. "Do you think he'll ever really try to make things right?" she asked, looking contemplative. It was the first time in ages I'd seen her get emotional about it. I thought carefully before answering. Honestly, I don't know. I used to think he would, but now, I'm not sure he's capable of it. I wasn't trying to be harsh, just realistic. After everything that had happened, I couldn't imagine Richard suddenly transforming into the father we'd always needed. Amanda nodded like she understood but wasn't quite ready to accept it herself. We didn't dwell on it though, quickly moving on to lighter topics like our mom's latest disastrous attempt at baking, which always gave us something to laugh about. By the time we parted ways, I was back in that good mental space where Richard didn't occupy my thoughts. But as life tends to go, the peace didn't last. A couple of months later, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Sarah, Richard's sister. We hadn't been in regular contact since everything with Richard began, but she'd heard about the wedding and apparently felt the need to reach out. "I've been meaning to talk to you about your father," she said, her voice unusually serious. My stomach immediately knotted up. She explained that Richard had been experiencing health problems. She didn't give specifics, but from her tone, it clearly wasn't something minor. I had no idea how to feel. Despite everything he'd done, despite how much he'd hurt me and Amanda, hearing that he was ill affected me more than I expected. He was still my father, after all. But at the same time, there was this lingering anger that hadn't fully dissipated. Was I supposed to forget everything and rush back to him just because he was sick? Was I expected to pretend none of the hurt had happened? I thanked my aunt for letting me know and told her I needed time to process this information. After hanging up, I sat motionless for a long time, staring at my phone and feeling utterly torn. Part of me wanted to reach out, to check how serious his condition was. But the part that had been repeatedly hurt by him was screaming to keep my distance, to protect myself from inevitable disappointment. I called Amanda, naturally. I needed to talk this through with someone who understood the entire complicated history. She was quiet for a while after I shared the news, then said something that really resonated with me: "You don't have to decide anything right now, Liv. It's okay to take your time." The problem was, I wasn't sure how much time I had to make this decision. What if his condition was worse than Sarah had let on? What if I waited too long and never got the chance to say the things I needed to say? But then again, did I even want to say anything at all? It felt like being caught in emotional quicksand. The more I struggled with the decision, the deeper I sank into confusion and doubt. Over the next several days, I tried to focus on work, on my life with Kyle, on our plans for the future. But my mind kept circling back to Richard and his health situation. I found myself wondering if this was some cosmic opportunity to mend things, to find proper closure, or if it was just another test to see if I'd fall back into old, harmful patterns. After what felt like an eternity of internal debate, I made my decision. I wasn't going to reach out, at least not immediately. If Richard truly wanted to repair our relationship, if he sincerely regretted his actions, he could contact me directly. I'd spent far too much of my life chasing after his approval and attention. I wasn't going to do it anymore, not even under these circumstances. And so I waited. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and still nothing. No phone call, no message, no indication that he wanted to make amends. I suppose that was my final answer. Throughout this time, something important crystallized for me: closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes you have to give it to yourself. Richard wasn't going to give me the apology I wanted, and he wasn't going to transform into the father I needed. And that's okay. I made my peace with it, and I didn't need him to validate my feelings or my decisions. Life kept moving forward, as it always does. Kyle and I settled into married life, which has been amazing despite the usual little adjustments and compromises. We're talking about starting a family in the next couple of years, and I'm both excited and terrified about the prospect of being a parent myself. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what kind of mother I'll be and if Richard's parenting will somehow influence mine in ways I'm not even aware of. Will I be overly permissive because he was so strict? Will I struggle with showing affection because he rarely did? These thoughts keep me up sometimes, but Kyle always reassures me that being aware of these concerns is already half the battle. Unlike Richard, I'm actually thinking about how my actions might affect my future children. That's something he never seemed to consider. My relationship with Amanda has grown even stronger through all this. We've always been close, but sharing this complicated grief over the father we never really had has created this unbreakable bond between us. We've been each other's rock, and I'm incredibly grateful for her. She's still keeping the door slightly ajar for Richard, but she's also much more guarded now. I respect her choice, just as she respects mine to keep that door firmly shut. My mom is doing great too. She's finally started dating again after years of focusing entirely on herself and her career post-divorce. The guy she's seeing seems nice enough, definitely treats her better than Richard ever did. It's strange seeing her with someone else, but it's also heartwarming to see her happy. As for Richard, I honestly don't know. Maybe someday I'll hear from him again. Maybe I won't. But either way, I know I'll be okay. I don't need his approval anymore. I don't need his presence to feel complete. I've built a life filled with people who've consistently shown up for me, who love me unconditionally, who support me without making me feel like a burden. And that, Reddit, is what real family looks like. I guess my question now is, Ida for not inviting my dad to my wedding and rejecting his request to walk me down the aisle, even when he finally expressed interest in being involved. Sometimes I still wonder if I made the right call, especially now that I know about his health issues. Should I have been more forgiving? Was I too harsh in denying him that father of the bride moment he suddenly wanted? Or did I do what was necessary to protect myself from more disappointment? For those who've been in similar situations with estranged parents, how did you handle it? Did you regret cutting them off, or was it ultimately the right decision for your mental health? TLDR, my dad was emotionally distant my whole life, then after divorcing my mom, he remarried and essentially replaced me and my sister with his new stepdaughters. He gave them everything he never gave us: college tuition, pets, vacations, family heirlooms, etc. I cut him off for years. Then when my wedding came around, he suddenly wanted not only to attend but to walk me down the aisle. I refused both requests, but now I've learned he has health problems and I'm second-guessing my decision.